First up, we have student and climate justice organizer Eliza Van Dyk on the Young People's Movement for Climate Justice. Eliza is a student at Westminster studying environmental justice and an organizer for Uplift and Wasatch Rising Tide, which are climate justice collectives here in the area. Without further ado, Eliza.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for coming. It's packed, which is awesome. So my name is Eliza. Maggie just introduced me. Thank you so much, Maggie. And before I start, I want to acknowledge that we are on the lands of the Ute, Goshute, and Shoshone peoples here at Westminster College. And I'm going to be talking about climate justice, so this is a really important thing to keep in mind throughout this entire panel and throughout our entire lives here at Westminster. And I'm speaking as myself, but I'm also speaking as a member of a team of young people who organize throughout the region. And so what I bring to this presentation comes from our collective work. So what is climate justice? Climate justice acknowledges that climate change is a social justice issue. It acknowledges that both the causes and the effects of climate change disproportionately impact communities that have been systemically marginalized and oppressed. So this is indigenous nations across our region, communities of color in both rural and urban settings, and lower income communities. And so when we're talking about climate justice, we are really trying to address the root causes of the climate crisis. So we're looking at exploitative institutions, systems such as the legacies of colonialism. We're looking at our economic system and extractive capitalist practices, and we're looking at power structures that perpetuate injustice. Because what we're really acknowledging is that injustice is as much of a threat to life and flourishing on this planet as climate change, and the two are really inseparable. So the other thing that we do is we're centering communities who are most impacted by climate change, and so these are people often use the term frontline communities, and we are prioritizing grassroots solutions to the climate crisis, so solutions that are coming directly from these impacted communities. And lastly, we are really interested in justice for all beings. So there's no hierarchy of human to non-human living beings. When we're thinking about climate change, we're thinking about collective liberation of all living things. I'm not going to go too deep into climate injustice because I really want to focus on the young people's movement, but it is helpful to think of a few key issues in the climate injustice that we are currently experiencing. And in our region specifically, there are entire swaths of land that are designated to extraction, known as energy sacrifice zones. Often these swaths of land are on indigenous nations and disproportionately impact low-income communities and communities of color. So we're keeping in mind the justice aspect of climate justice. Just some statistics on that. In 2015, 30% of America's coal west of the Mississippi and up to 50% of uranium lay within Native American tribal lands. When we're talking about extractive industries and we're talking about climate justice, we really have to keep these things in mind. And then the other thing that I wanted to mention is that immigrant justice and migrant justice are climate justice issues. And so if we're advocating for just energy futures and a just climate future, we're also advocating for immigrant justice. We're also advocating for indigenous sovereignty. We're also advocating for all of these other interwoven issues. And so something that really helps put this into perspective is that Hurricane Maria led to almost 5,000 deaths and left hundreds of thousands more in Puerto Rico without power or access to necessary health services, forcing over 179,000 people to leave the island for the mainland US. So this is just a small picture of one occurrence that led to huge migration, so something to keep in mind. In our area, there are so many examples of climate injustice. A few The Inland Port Project, which will bring increased train, road, and air traffic to the northwest quadrant of Salt Lake City, is going to potentially impact predominantly communities of color. So this is a project of environmental racism. And then when we're thinking about also justice for all living things and living beings, this project threatens the Great Salt Lake ecosystem. And then in our greater region, in Utah, the White Mesa Uranium Mill is the only operating conventional uranium mill in the United States. And it's only 3 miles from the Ute Mountain Ute tribal nation. So that's another example in our region of climate injustice. So now to the young people's movements for climate justice. And when I say movements, I mean that there are so many different movements happening in this region, happening in this nation, and in this world. I'm speaking specifically about a movement that I am engaged in, and these are some of the things that we believe and practice. So we believe in collective liberation. I said that earlier, and what that means to me is that no one is free until we're all free. And so that means when we're thinking about climate justice and we're thinking about justice for the future, we're thinking about every living being on this earth. We're thinking about every person in every community. And so we really have to prioritize justice in our movements. Secondly, we demand a just transition. So what this means is when we're transitioning to sustainable or regenerative energy futures, we have to do so in a way that also prioritizes justice. So who's working in extractive industries? Who are the coal miners? Where are their jobs going to come from? In our communities in rural Utah, we have to be thinking about really making sure that all of our communities have access to flourishing economies and that we're not just replacing coal with solar and leaving people jobless. And so it's thinking about really systemic transition and huge change in the world that we live in. We demand an end to all forms of extraction. This includes uranium, which many think is a potential alternative to highly polluting fossil fuels, but it's incredibly extractive and it leaves a lot of communities with contaminated water sources, frankly, radioactive homelands. And so that when we say all extraction, we mean all extraction. We follow the leadership of Indigenous peoples and people of color and those most impacted by the climate crisis. This is really important because our movements are prefigurative. And what that means is we are trying to currently live and work in the vision that we want for our future. So if we imagine a world where all of our communities have access to just economies and everyone has access to beauty and flourishing, then that's what we have to be practicing right now with each other, in our communities, in our schools, as much as we possibly can. We believe in a diversity of tactics for change. So we practice nonviolent direct action. We practice engaging in our electoral system. We practice storytelling and healing and art. And the reason that we do this is because we are in a huge moment of transition. And so we have to really strategically work within and beyond our current system. We acknowledge that the current systems that we're living within are extremely oppressive and do not support the living of all beings. And we are living in these systems, so we have to find ways to be revolutionary both within and beyond our spaces and places that we live in. So I work with a group called Uplift, and that is who I do the majority of my organizing with, and so that's who I'm representing today. And as of a couple months ago, we are a fully autonomous, youth-led climate justice group on the Colorado Plateau and in the greater Southwest, which is really exciting. And we connect, train, and mobilize young people for climate justice. So we're regionally based. We have organizers across Utah, Arizona, Colorado, New Mexico, and on indigenous nations on the Colorado Plateau. That's who I am representing. So I'm addressing a room of mostly young people, which is really awesome. I wasn't sure who the crowd was going to be today. I would like to invite you all to join us. I have contact information on a later slide, but we're launching a series of collectives across the region for training and action. So if this is something that sounds interesting to you, let me know. And we also have a series of fellowship opportunities throughout the coming year, and would love to get any of you involved if you're interested in that. And if you're not a young person in this room, you can still support us by donating to us, by listening to your students, by supporting young people across the world, across the region, by opposing the Inland Port Project. And I put out some zines on the table as you walk in, and there is a list of other organizations that work on climate and environmental justice that you can also support. Here's my contact information, and Uplift, here's our information as well. So if you would like to contact me or follow us, or you work with the group and you'd like to be partnered, let me know. And I also wanted to end on a moment of hope. We are living in really challenging times and really transitional times. And as young people, as Maggie said, we don't know what our future looks like in this moment. The reason I chose to theme this presentation around sunflowers is because sunflowers are the national symbol for the climate justice movement. They absorb toxins in their tissues, healing the land, and they symbolize resilience and justice. They are the beauty and the hope that continue to shine in chaos. Thank you.